Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session of the Future Mind. I'm James Barbieri. I'll be your host for today. So if you need anything during the call, just drop me a text in the chat box and I'll try and help you out. Just very briefly, like any other call, if you can please make sure your microphone is muted. But we do invite you all to turn on your cameras if you're comfortable with that. And of course, this session is recorded for archival purposes, and we will be publishing this on our YouTube page, so you can all have a chance to watch it again. So today we will be having a conversation between Pim van Lommel and Àlex Gómez-Marín. Pim has worked for almost 30 years as a cardiologist in Arnhem in the Netherlands and is now doing full-time research on the mind-brain relation. He published several articles on cardiology, but since he started his research on NDEs in survivors of cardiac arrest in 86, he is the author of over 20 articles. His book in 2007 is Endless Consciousness and has written many chapters about NDEs. He was the co-founder of the Dutch IANDS, and in 1988, he has achieved many awards, such as the Bruce Grayson Research Award at the International Association of Near-Death Studies. And in 2005, he achieved the Lifetime Achievement Award from the President of India at the World Congress of Clinical and Preventative Cardiology in New Delhi. Àlex, I'm sure most of you know him already, but for those who don't, he is a physicist turned neuroscientist, the current director of the Pari Center. He holds a PhD in theoretical physics and a master's in biophysics from the University of Barcelona. And since 2016, he has been the head of the Behavior of Organisms Laboratory at the Instituto de Neurociencia in Alicante, where he's an associate professor of the Spanish Research Council. And with that, I'll pass it over to both of you. Welcome both.
Thank you. Thank you very much, James. Okay, well, it's fantastic to be here again with all of you, and I'm very honored that Professor van Lommel accepted our invitation. You were introduced to me virtually via Luján Comas, who is leading president of Eclovi Foundation, together with Xavier Melo, the founder. I'm very grateful to them for having put me in contact with you. Today is a rather special day as well, because exactly 3 years ago, I was sent to hospital due to some medical problem. Some of you know about it. And there I had a near-death experience. So it's a strange anniversary for me, and maybe a timely one to be talking to you, Pim. And well, there's a lot to talk about, and most of it is here in your book, and also in one of the winning essays of the Bigelow Prize. We'll see how much we can cover, but I won't stress myself trying to pull it off. Go and read it. But well, thank you very much for joining us. And perhaps to get us going, I'd like you to describe the process of changing your mind from being, I suppose, an indoctrinated materialist as a physician, as a doctor, but then coming across an anecdotal situation that you decided to follow upon, and then reading that book by Ritchie, and then deciding perhaps I'll start looking at these phenomena and talking about these, and then the long arc of the study. So basically, let's go slowly through this entire process. And also, once it was published, I want to know what happened, the reception. So just walk us through that amazing journey of yours, if you don't mind.
Okay. Well, it was in 1969 when I just started in my specialization in cardiology, and I was working in one of the first coronary care units in the Netherlands, because modern techniques of resuscitation became possible. We have the electric shock, the defibrillation, and external chest compression became possible. Before 1967, all patients with the cardiac arrest died. So now we had the possibility to resuscitate the patient. So I was working in one of the first coronary care units. We had a 44-year-old man with an acute myocardial infarction. He had a cardiac arrest. We resuscitated him at 3 or 4 shocks. They regained consciousness, and we were, as a resuscitation team, I was the doctor in charge. They were very happy that it was new for us. The patient came back, but the patient was very, very disappointed. And he told about going through a tunnel, and talking about the light and the beautiful landscape and music, etc. And I never forget this event. I never did anything with it. I was just starting my specialization at a young family with 2 young children. Until in 1986, I read the book by George Ritchie, Return from Tomorrow, where he describes in very extensive near-death experience when he died in 1943 as medical student. He died of a double pneumonia, and there were no antibiotics available for this medical student. So he died, was declared death. His body was covered with a sheet. And the nurse was so upset that this young medical student had died that he was able to persuade the medical doctor to give him an injection of adrenaline right into his heart, which was quite uncommon. And after a period of 9 minutes death, he regained consciousness and had a very deep, very impressive near-death experience with all the aspects we know by now as universal elements. I'd never before also didn't know anything about near-death. I had never read the book Life After Life by Raymond Moody. It was published in 1975. But after reading this book, I just started to ask patients who survived cardiac arrest in the past if they could have had memories from the period of unconsciousness, from the period of cardiac arrest. And to my big surprise, within 2 years out of 50 patients, 12 of them shared the NDE with me. So between 86 and 88, I had 12 patients who shared the NDE with me. And then started my scientific curiosity, because I had learned in university, and as everybody here learned at school, I learned at university medical school, that consciousness is a product of brain function. So when you have cardiac arrest, you got unconscious, and there's no circulation to the brain, there's no breathing. So it should not be possible to have memories from the period of unconsciousness, let alone enhance consciousness with the period of, with the possibility of perception out and above the body, with memories from early childhood, with cognition, with emotion, etc. So this should be impossible. So that's this, because of this scientific curiosity, we started in 1988 a prospective study in a total of 344 consecutive survivors of cardiac arrest in 10 Dutch hospitals to see if we could find an explanation for the cause and content of an NDE. And this study was published in the Lancet in December 2001. And this prospective study, what we found, that 18% of these patients, 62 patients, had memories of the period of unconsciousness, had a near-death experience with all the classical elements. And 82% of those patients did not have any memory at all. Now we compared the two groups of the 18% with NDE and the 82% without, to see if there could be any difference at all. And what we found, to our surprise, there was no difference at all. Let's say when you see for the duration of cardiac arrest, it was 2 minutes or 8 minutes, didn't matter at all. If you had been unconscious for 5 minutes or 3 weeks in coma, didn't matter at all. If you had complicated CPR with the need of intubation, a lot of medication, didn't matter at all. So the severity of anoxia of the brain didn't matter at all if you had an NDE or not. And also other factors like the given medication didn't matter at all. Psychological explanations like fear of death before the arrest didn't matter at all. Gender, education, religion, if you were atheist or Christian or Muslim, didn't matter at all. So the main conclusion of this first and still largest prospective study in survivors of cardiac arrest for NDE was there was no scientific explanation to find why people have a near-death experience, and we could exclude especially the anoxia of the brain, because until that time there had only been retrospective studies and people thought it was just anoxia of the brain, neurotransmitters in the brain, and hallucinations, false memories, whatever. And we could include all these possibilities by definition now that there was no explanation at all. And the
Yes.
second part of the study we did was a longitudinal study with taped interviews 2 years and 8 years after the cardiac arrest of all patients who still survived with an NDE, and a matched control group of patients who survived the cardiac arrest without any memory. Matched control group is the same age, the same gender, and the same time interval. And we did this study to see if the transformation you hear about after an NDE was just a result of the cardiac arrest or the result of the near-death experience, but it had never been studied in prospective design before. And what we found, that especially the classical transformation was only in patients with a near-death experience. That is, no fear of death anymore. They're sure that there is a continuity of consciousness. Death is not the end of who you are. Second is a new insight of what is important in life. It's all about unconditional love, compassion, and empathy. First towards yourself, accept all the negative aspects we all have. And then also unconditional love, empathy, and compassion towards others, towards nature, to a planet Earth, because you feel connected with everybody, with everything. It's why people call it near-death also an experience of oneness. You still feel connected with everybody and everything. And the third aspect is the enhanced intuitive sensitivity, that you know what other people feel, other people think, you know about future events. You think of somebody on the phone, they will call you by phone. And this is kind of what we call scientifically an non-local information exchange, because you receive information not by your senses and not by your body, and the information you receive is beyond time and beyond space. And people are always quite reluctant to talk about this because it's quite disturbing for them as well. So what we found is in the longitudinal study that we could objectify the subjective experience, because you cannot prove subjective experience, but we could prove statistically the transformation of these patients. So that was the main conclusion, what was published in Lancet.
Thank you for laying it all out, and we'll come back and slowly walk through all this because it's very important. We'll go back to the flat EEG. We'll go back to the it's just a hallucination. We'll go back to the important issue about transformation, transforming people's lives, and I think we'll finish as well talking about these edges of consciousness that have to do with NDEs. But before going into that, and it's very useful to just lay them all out for us. How did you publish this in the Lancet? I mean, and not just, I want to know a little bit about how is that even possible? Because a piece of research demonstrating or showing or providing evidence for an impossible phenomenon. I mean, we know how impossible it is to actually publish. Plus, I think I've read or heard from you that you did that study for more than a decade without funding, without receiving funding. So tell us about the backstage, because it's remarkable.
We did it without funding, just in the 3 hours and weekends, taking holidays, and we trained a lot of volunteers to do the taped interviews as well. And so we had a kind of organization. We were very well organized and we wanted to do this. It was just following what we needed to do, following our heart. It was not about funding. We couldn't get funding at all. But we just sent our manuscript to the Lancet. And I heard many years later from someone who knew someone from the editorial board of the Lancet that they had a huge problem because the methodology was well done. It was just everything science-based, empirical science, statistics, etc. was well done. But the subject NDE was quite a problem for some of them. But they said, well, methodology is well done, so we have to accept it. We had to rewrite a bit, but we did it. We got 2 weeks to change it a bit, but then it was published, and it was a worldwide stir. It was on the front page of all papers all over the world. There was by accident came back from India, and in the Indian Times on the front page, 2/3 of the page was about our study. So it was everywhere there. So I couldn't do my work as a cardiologist for 1 week because I had interviews and emails from the morning to late in the evening.
Totally. Yes, it's indeed an anomaly. There are a few in the history of science. There is this 1974 paper, I think, in Nature about remote viewing, and never again. There's a 1965 paper in Science about telepathy, and never again. There's the BAM paper on retrocausality in 2001. I mean, it's really remarkable when this happens, when there's this space for the research, for this heretical research to just surface, and that catalyzes more people and more interest.
And you know that about 3% of the manuscript is accepted for publication in the Lancet.
Yes, yes.
So it was quite rare. But
what was the reaction of your peers, your other cardiologists? Were they all of a sudden more interested and started asking,
No.
or it was more the opposite, like, oof, I don't want to touch this at all?
Well, there are some doctors, physicians who are interested, but mostly they're not. And they're silent about it or looking the other way around. But it was not that important for me. I remember when the Lancet article was published, I was working in an 800-bed teaching hospital, then the medical director of the hospital talked about my study. He said, nowadays, worldwide, the name of Rijnstate Hospital is mentioned worldwide because of this article in the Lancet.
Yes.
It was a joke, but it's still true.
Okay, so first critique is always, invariably, well, sure, people may tell those stories. We can call those facts about what people believe. And they may be hallucinating or having delusions or illusions, but not really real. Why is that wrong?
Well, first of all, you need a functioning brain to have an hallucination, delusion, or illusion. And we know now that during cardiac arrest, the function of the brain has stopped totally. So there have been studies done in induced cardiac arrest in humans, but also in animals. And when you have, and then there's also these studies were done with the EEG registration of electrical activity of the cortex of the brain. And when you induce cardiac arrest, the people are unconscious within seconds. The blood flow to the brain, you can measure by Doppler in the carotid artery, is 0 within 1 second. There's no blood going to the brain anymore. The body reflexes are gone. The body reflexes, so the body doesn't do anything, and the body reflexes are a function of the cortex of the brain. The brainstem reflexes are gone. The gag reflex, you put a finger in someone's throat without any problem. The corneal reflexes or the pupils do not react to light anymore. There's a brainstem reflexes, and the breathing stems are closer to brainstem stop functioning, so there is no breathing anymore. And when you look to the animal studies, you see also the deeper structures of the brain stop functioning within 10 to 20 seconds, and the EEG stops activity within 10 to 20 seconds. So there's a flatline EEG, and we know in all the coronary care units, people are never successfully resuscitated within 1, 2, 3, 4 minutes, and never within 20 seconds. So all our patients must have had a flatline EEG, and also have been several other scientific prospective study and NDE on survivors of cardiac arrest, and a total of 562 patients who survived cardiac arrest. And all these patients had a percentage of NDE between 15 and 20%. Was no explanation physiologically or psychologically, and they all must have had a flatline EEG as well. So that's a challenge to understand why it is possible. And then about the hallucination as well, where you have the outer body experience that you can perceive from above what is happening during resuscitation, and people can tell details about what is said or what is thought and what has been done. to them, and they described the resuscitation in the room as well. That it is by definition not an hallucination, because you can corroborate these veridical perceptions. And when you corroborate it, we ask doctors and nurses and family members about what happened and the time that it happened. Then you can say that by definition, it really happened, and it's not an hallucination. And again, you need a functioning brain to have an hallucination.
I agree, and definitely a malfunctioning or nearly dead or perhaps a clinically dead brain should not be able to remember those things, even less to have such a lucid consciousness, and even a higher standard. If you have veridical perceptions, man, come on, this is even more impossible or more incredible. But my materialist friends would say, well, look, they would say, you can have all of that, but if you don't have an EEG at the same time in those patients, how do you know? And even if you had one, how do you know that there are not a few neurons out there still alive or still firing, right? So in a way, they'll say this is an extraordinary claim, and so it's on you or on us to bring the extraordinary evidence that really the brain is off. Otherwise, we will stay with our position that this is a hallucination.
I've heard this before.
I know.
But first of all, there has been published a book, The Self Does Not Die, and it's recently published by Àlex with 128 corroborated cases of veridical perceptions, with all doctors and nurses being asked, etc. So, and what they found is that more than 95% of this out-of-body experience were really happened during resuscitation, during CPR, during surgery, or during general anesthesia, or during coma. So then it is by definition not a hallucination. Now about the brain function, where there is a paradoxical occurrence of enhanced consciousness, which is much more than just a waking consciousness. And we know by neurophysiology that you need many cortical centers be active and exchanging information and working together to be able to experience waking consciousness. And there's no such what we call global workspace. There's no such activity at all in the brain. And perhaps there could be some cells somewhere not dead, but the total coherence of the brain has stopped, and you need a coherent brain, a lot of centers working together to have the possibility to experience waking consciousness. And this is not waking consciousness, this is the paradoxical occurrence of enhanced consciousness when the brain does not function at all.
Why do you think it's not happening in the other about 80% of those who can be brought back?
Yeah, that's also a good question. I often hear this question as well. So there has been one study done, a prospective study in near-death experience in children by Pim van Lommel. And what he found, and that was children who were in coma, nearly drowned, had meningitis, encephalitis, etc. They found 70% of those children who were clinical dead had a near-death experience. There have been retrospective studies done, especially for traffic accident people, and they're between 30 and 40 years old, and you find about 30 to 40% cases of near-death experience, but these are retrospective studies. In our study, the mean age was 62 years old, and we found 18% near-death experience. When we changed, divided the patients under the age of 60 and above the age of 60, we found that under the age of 60, there were more patients who had a near-death experience. So the younger the patients are, the more they report a near-death experience. What we also found is when you had a near-death experience as a child or a younger age, you had more chance to have a near-death experience with cardiac arrest. So when you have been out of your body before, it will happen more easily. It's also when women who have been sexually abused, then they usually leave the body, and they also have more NDEs as an adult. So for me, when you're young, under the age of 5, the connection between consciousness and the brain is very loose. Young children are open-minded. They see a lot. They're open-minded, have an enhanced consciousness by nature, and they lose it when they go to school. So when you're older, the connection between the brain, body, and consciousness is more strict. And when you have a resuscitation, they must be resuscitated within 5 to 10 minutes. Then 80% get the possibility to get out of the body. Other people will need perhaps 30 minutes of an hour or more. I don't know. But I'm for sure know that everybody will have a death experience. Everybody will have a death experience. And that's as we know because of the after-death communication, that people can have the possibility to be in contact with the consciousness of deceased relatives, which happens in Europe. 125,000 people must have had an after-death communication. And in the US must be 175, according to recent Pew Research inquiry. So a lot of people have the after-death communication, which means that consciousness of deceased relatives are still there, and there's even a possibility to meet them. But also can happen in a near-death experience. You can also have contact with the consciousness of deceased relative during an NDE. So consciousness will never disappear. Consciousness has no beginning, has no end. It's beyond time, beyond space. It's always there.
We'll go there in a minute. And actually, I was surprised reading your book, that you explained very carefully the case about children, what other traditions have said, what happens to the brain when the heart stops, slowly, your own prospective study. But then you go into the whole thing, with all these phenomena and also theories, which we will talk about in a minute. But before that, so if I understood correctly, then some of those resuscitated people that come back and don't report the NDE, you think it's because, in a way, their mind and their brain were so stuck together, that there wasn't time, it didn't happen. It's not that they don't remember it. It's just that it didn't happen. But at the same time, you're saying, if I understood you correctly, that whoever dies will have an NDE. Whether the person can be brought back and tell the story, that's another matter. Am I correct in understanding you?
That's my idea. So when you had as a young patient, young person, an NDE, they will have more chance to have an NDE as an adult, because the connection between the brain and consciousness has already been less strict. And as a child, there's always a less strict connection. Children are open.
They are, yes. Now, something I really appreciate about your study, it's not just that you put on the table the phenomenon and objective measures about it, but because some people may say, well, whatever, what really matters is what matters to us, which is that we are transformed after these experiences. So in what way people are transformed, and why do you think so? I mean, one of the things I read, and I'm not sure if that comes from your own studies, that the divorce rate is much higher after having an NDE.
Yes. Well, what I told you, there are three main transformations. First is they lose the fear of death. There's no fear of death anymore, because death is not the end of who you are. The second is the new insight in what is important in life. So it's not about external things. It's not about materialism. It's not about making money. It's not about having a big house, a big car, a young body, beautiful clothes. It's about giving love to others, helping people, etc. So when your partner tells us it's not the same person as when I'm married before many years ago, it changed a lot, so that the divorce rate is more than 70%. But first of all, perhaps I would like to mention that the content of the NDE is usually positive. But when you try to talk about it to your doctor, he dismisses it. He said, oh, it is a hallucination. He goes, oh, here you had some medication, and don't talk about it anymore. And it's the same for family members, for partners, for friends. They don't want to listen to you. And you think, personally, I become crazy. What happened to me, I cannot imagine. It doesn't fit in my worldview. So I must be crazy. And they don't know anything about it. And so there's a long period of depression, loneliness, and homesickness. And it can take years and years until they read a book or see a television program or hear someone talk about it on a radio program. And they say, oh, it has a name. I'm not the only one. And it's so helpful with them. And then they start to accept the experience. So they need people who can listen without any prejudice and without any comment. Then they can accept it, and then they can integrate the experience into their daily life. And it can take 10, 20, 30 years. I've met people who have been silent about the experience for 50 years. They're still depressed. So it's a spiritual trauma as well. Not just a positive experience, but it's a spiritual trauma because of this material society where we live in.
Well, thank you for mentioning integration. That's fascinating too, because it's not just that we are changed, it's how do we fit that into our frameworks of mind, of society. And it reminds me of other edges of consciousness that we'll talk about in a minute that also require integration. Now, another very important point you bring here is that we talk about it. And your own story just betrays that you came across that and then by chance came across a book of somebody, Richie, who decided to talk about it. And then you started, it's like a contagion phenomenon. You start to talk about it or ask your patients. And you know how people behave in front of a man with a white coat, right? It's like, well, I'll be very careful because they know more than I do. The experts know more. So what does my experience have to say here? Well,
that's the way you approach patients. First of all, I'm always sitting at a patient's bed, never standing. I touch them, mostly keeping their hands or whatever. And then I had only one question. Do you have memories from the period of unconsciousness? That's the only question. And it was no or why. When they said why, then it took another hour to sit there because then the story came. And then, people know intuitively and they feel that you're open, that you can listen. And I know by now the people come to me because they feel that I'm open. And they also feel when the doctor is closed and they cannot share it with others. With such doctors. So those kind of physicians never will hear a story as well.
It's so telling. And I wonder if that's in the methods of your paper, because that way of approaching nature as a scientist or as a doctor, it's not told about. It's more the romantic way, the German romantic way of being in relationship with nature, with, persuasion and also whispering as opposed to interrogating. And so it's so concrete what you say. I sit down, I touch the patient, and I'm very careful how I phrase what I say. And then if you do it correctly, then secrets open up, which is what happened to you.
And the definition for science for me is asking questions with an open mind. Forget what you've learned, forget the concept. So, and that's science, asking questions with an open mind. And that's when you do it, the beautiful things will happen.
Now, that's true, I would say, in theory. Now, in practice, it's also true. But there's a cynical part of me. There's the romantic, the naive part that's all in with you. Let's ask questions in an open-minded way. The reality of the social politics of science is that you're crushed. You're destroyed, right? You're not funded. You're ridiculed. How do you deal with that scientifically? But also, I'm asking the human aspects of as a person, because it's from my own experience, it's not enough just to be open. That's not how the game works, unfortunately.
I was emotionally touched by all those people when they were able to share. The experience, in that experience, is an ineffable experience. There are no words for it. So they're trying to find words for it. They are reluctant to share. They are emotional, and they feel those emotions. So it just happens. And they feel it, I think. They feel that I'm open. I resonate with them.
And that, you think that emotion and that proximity and that honesty and that humanity, in a way, protects you from the the lions, let's put it this way, the fierce lions in science that would say whatever rubbish, bullshit, pseudoscience, for instance. And I mean, I don't want to get negative here, but I was checking your Wikipedia, and we all know how terrible Wikipedia is
Wikipedia in
working.
English is just written by skeptics.
Yes. I mean, we
Just
should
by
say that
skeptics.
enough of that mobbing, right? Like of just, but you see, this is the uncomfortable and unfortunate truth about how things work, despite that humanity, that's what they say. And if somebody hasn't heard of it, look, let me just preface it differently. If you've had the experience, you've had it, you know it. If somebody close to you has had it and you trust that person, you can empathize. But if you just come across from another side, more intellectual side, or just curious, and you read those things, okay, they say it's pseudoscience, but it's not.
Until you meet the person who is willing to share it with you. And about the critical or debunkers or skeptics, I always quote a Dutch painter who said, I'm always interested in the critics of my work, so I learn those people know who they are. So when you're critical, it's about the person who is the debunker, about the skeptic. It's not about me. It's about them. So when they have a problem, they have a problem. And I've learned not to have a problem with the debunkers or whatever, aggressive. And you should know that I received for many, many years 200 emails a day, and they're all positive and grateful what I've done and what they've read. So usually it's all positive. It's all positive. And there are just some skeptics who are making some noise on the internet, but that's it. They have a problem. I don't have a problem with it at all. And I never want to convince them at all as well. They have to find out themselves, and they're interested. It's all right with me as well. So I never try to convince people.
Yes,
they can read the papers, they can read books, they can look for interviews, they can watch interviews, whatever. If they're interested, and they're not interested, then they have a problem.
This is another subtle aspect that I wanted to ask you, and you're already responding to it, which is, well, who are you trying to convince when you write your book? And maybe you say, well, I'm not trying to convince anybody. I just explaining them what I saw, what they told me, and then just do whatever you wish with that.
That's why I wrote a book in 9 months with corrections.
Yes. Well, it's a very complete book in terms of, as I was saying, the topics you touch, the references. I enjoyed very much the references, and bringing us to really unexpected places. And since we're talking about the book, I saw, so the title is Consciousness Beyond Life, but I think this is a scientific case for non-locality that you're doing here.
That's it.
Right? Okay, let's talk about that, and maybe talk about that also in conjunction with other edges of consciousness. There are many, and you dare to touch them all here, most of them, virtually all of them. But before that, death is probably a portal to leave the physical world. But what about the portal to enter? What homologies, parallelisms can we draw between death and being born?
Well, first of all, let's talk about consciousness and non-local consciousness. What we learn from people with an near-death experience, when they have a life review, they relive their whole life from birth, and they are connected with the consciousness of other people in the past as well. So when you took something from your 5-year-old sister, you know how sad she was, you know everything. Everything is connected in the past, but you also can have future events. You know, sometimes you see things for your personal future or future of the world as well. And we have a cardiac arrest of 3 minutes. You can talk for weeks about it, because everything happens at the same moment, instantaneously. There's no time and no space, and everything is connected. And that's what we know. It's the analogy with quantum physics. The analogy is everything is always connected instantaneously, and that's what we call non-locality. So that's why we call it non-local consciousness. It's always there, without a beginning, without an end, always connected. everything and everybody. And when people come back in the body, they still have this enhanced intuitive sensitivity. They still feel connected with everything and everybody. So we can talk about it later, how we can explain this. But first of all, your question about there's consciousness before birth and after death, because there's no beginning, nor will there ever be an end to consciousness. And we know even from, I've heard a young boy who was very open, who said, I have chosen my parents, where I should be born. So even those stories you can hear when you're open. So
so in a strict sense, there's nothing afterlife because there's no after, right? If we take this seriously, then we're beyond space-time.
yes, so I talk about the continuity of consciousness. So, and death is the end of our physical aspects, it's the end of our body, but it's not the end of our consciousness. Consciousness is always there, always. So death is just the end of our physical aspects.
So what survives then? Memories, personality? I mean, these are different concepts, right? The ego, the self, personality, individuality.
No ego. The ego is body linked. Is according to what our waking consciousness is. Ego is about greed, about sex, about materialism, about I want to have, I want to have, I want to have. That's lost. But your personality, what I call the self with capital, is there, the essence of who you are, and what you did and how you lived and how you were behaved. Because what we know from out-of-body experiences, well, we know from near-death experience that everything you have done, everything you have said, and everything what you have thought is kept forever, with influence of others as well. So think about it. Everything you have ever thought is kept forever, not in your body, not in your brain, but in this non-local realm. It's always there. It's part of your higher self.
Now we're getting here more speculative, but then what's this whole business of becoming incarnated? What for?
Well, that's a famous question. And there are a lot of religions, the Tibetan Buddhism, Upanishad Vedas, the Kabbalah, anthroposophy, the Sufis, whatever, but also all indigenous people know about reincarnation. And they say that the essence of who you are is coming back. The higher self is, in my opinion, a light being. And this light being sends some aspects back to our body, which could be possible. I don't know, but when you read about Ian Stevenson studies, and also the 40 cases with biological markers, the spontaneous story of reincarnation under the age of 5 is usually traumatic death in the previous life, murder, whatever, traffic accident, soldiers who were shot. And they can have biological markers, the place where they died in the previous life. So it's quite striking about it. So I think reincarnation is a possibility. And Ian Stevenson has said there's no proof for reincarnation, but it is beyond reasonable doubt. And I think that's wise.
Do you think babies have near-birth experiences or near-conception experiences? Again, I insist, how are we to think what happens when we enter rather than when we leave?
I don't know. But I think coming here in the world is not that easy at all. It's hard work, the same as the process of dying is not easy at all. It's hard work. The process of dying can be very difficult. But death is something else. So people who had an NDE are not afraid of death, but they know that the process of dying can be difficult. And the process of birth can be difficult as well. And there are quite a lot of stories with babies who had a complicated childbirth.
Yeah.
And then they had a near-death experience. And usually they don't remember it. But these are the children who have an enhanced intuitive sensitivity from early childhood. And when the adults come to me and tell me, I had been open with intuition from early childhood, I always ask about what was your birth about? And then more than 80% tell me, ask and they tell me, yes, it was a complicated childbirth. And there have been some examples that people really had an out-of-body experience during birth and saw everything, the complication that happened as well. But that's rather rare.
Mm-hmm. Now, you made a distinction now between death and dying. And as I told you at the beginning, I had a near-death experience, but I wouldn't say I'm not afraid of dying. Perhaps the difference is that dying is something that still scares most of us, but death is a separate matter here.
Yes, death is the end of who you are in the physical form, but the essence of who you are is still there. The process of dying is your body is getting rid of a lot of problems as well. And there's also, when we talk about enhanced consciousness, then you have all these periods of enhanced consciousness during the process of dying. So you have the end-of-life experiences in the last days or weeks. People are dying and have enhanced consciousness. They're seeing the deceased partner of parents, and they know they were coming to get you. You see beautiful landscapes, you see lights, children see angels, and they have an inner knowing that the moment of leaving the body is still close. There's a study done in Switzerland, and they found out about 90% of the patients who are in the process of dying have end-of-life experiences, but usually they're not really put into words, or just you have to be very careful. And usually end-of-life experiences are called hallucinations or side effects of drugs, but they are a real experience of enhanced consciousness. And then you have the experience of enhanced consciousness of the moment of dying, where you are away of the patient who is dying. Let's say you wake up at 4 o'clock in the night and you think of your father, and you, oh, my father, and then the next morning you got a phone call that your father died at that very moment. And sometimes you even see him coming into your room and saying goodbye. It's a pre-mortal experience. And then you can have the shared death experience where you are at the deathbed of someone who is dying, a very close friend, close loved one. Sometimes you're taking with him in the process. The room can be full of light, but you can sometimes see the light, and you're taking with the light in a tunnel into the other dimension as well. And then at once you're standing again at the bed with someone who died just before a shared death experience. And then you have the after-death experience, what we called you before. In the first days, weeks, or months after the death of a loved one, you will have the possibility of being in contact with his consciousness, someone getting information you was not known. You can see them as a light being. You can see them as in a kind of body. You can feel them. You can smell them. You can hear them. So all these kind of experiences are clear that consciousness does not end, and the moment of death and the period of dying. And then they also, what they did not mention now is the terminal lucidity. When people have the end stage of Alzheimer, for years, don't recognize their family members, the children for years anymore, or even are sometimes in coma or unconscious. Suddenly sit in their bed, smile around, talk with the family members, call them by name, and die, which is totally impossible. You know how the brain of end-stage Alzheimer people look like. It's just mud. There's nothing left from a brain. So it's still, even then, is the consciousness possible to break through for a moment at the moment of death.
I agree with you. There are all these anomalies taken separately, one by one. You can try to break them and say, well, whatever, hallucination here, wishful thinking there. But when you put them all on the table under this new frame, well, they add up and form a coherent and compelling case.
Yes, everything comes together. The consciousness is fundamental. It starts with consciousness. In the universe, consciousness is fundamental together with information and energy. Everything comes from consciousness. There it starts.
Now, the way neuroscientists could think about it is just rewind more than 100 years and read William James and realize his distinction, which you also cite, of course, in the book, and explain between brain and mind being related, but the nature of that relationship is rather permissive as opposed to productive. right? More like the idea of a brain not as some sort of machine that produces consciousness, but a kind of filter or receiver.
Exactly.
Now, how much more concrete, and that's part of my job here, but I'm asking you, and you engage in some speculations and you bring in quantum mechanics maybe as an analogy to be able to think non-locality in macroscopic systems. You also, I was really surprised in the book, you speak about DNA and maybe as kind of some sort of sacred molecule that could be this little portal to non-locality. Now, how do we become more concrete about this kind of modeling so that we can provide a more explicit theoretical framework to think about these phenomena?
Well, first of all, the question is, what is the mind-brain relationship? And what you said before, that the brain does not produce consciousness, but it facilitates. It has a transmitter function and filter function, or I would like to call it an interface. So the brain receives a part of this non-local consciousness and a part of the memories you have into or as your waking consciousness. But your real consciousness is beyond your brain. And to understand it, this interface function of your body and brain are compared always with the internet. At this very moment, you're sitting there are 1 billion websites going through you through the walls, and also hundreds of thousands of telephone calls, all in the form of electromagnetic informational fields. You need a functioning computer to receive this 1 billion websites, and you need a special code to find one or two websites. All over the world you can receive the cloud, but your computer does not produce the 1 billion websites, it receives it. Your brain doesn't produce consciousness, but it receives it. Your mobile phone doesn't produce the telephone call, but it receives it. So the television set doesn't produce the program, but it receives it. Your radio, your concert you hear, it's not produced by your radio, but you receive it. So that's the concept. The brain and the body are transmitters or interface. And then the next question is, how does it work? We don't know. But the quantum spin correlation that we know from the fMRI machines could be a possibility, but I don't know. There are several possibilities I mentioned in my book as well. But then the DNA, the question is, where you have a new human being coming with the egg cell and the spermatozoa come together after 4 cell divisions, cells are starting to change into a heart cell, a brain cell, a nerve cell, or a stomach cell, or whatever. The structure of the DNA in each cell of your body is the same, but the function is changing. And the function is changing because of information from outside. That's what we know from studies as well. I mentioned it in my book. So for me, the DNA could be the interface in each cell. And there are a lot of, let's say, ideas that can fit with this idea as well. There's what we like the dark matter and dark energy in the universe. 4% we know, and 96% we don't know. The DNA, 6% we know the function, and 84% is junk DNA. And I think could play a role. It's just an idea, but I think there are aspects that this could be true. Also, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, please.
Now, let's say when we talk about what we call the transplanted memories, when people who have a heart transplant or heart lung transplant, but also sometimes liver transplant, sometimes change in character. And in the United States, you can know after 5 years who the donor is. In Europe, it's not possible. But like the book, The Change of Heart, but also other cases I quote in my book as well, they change in the way of the character of the deceased donor, so that when you receive an organ from a donor, this organ is a living organ, and it still functions as a receiver for aspects of the consciousness of the deceased donor. That fits together.
Yes, totally. And it has ethical implications and also redefinitions of what we understand by a dead body, a dying body,
Exactly.
an organism and its organs. Yes. I was going to mention that I really appreciate from a scientist of your stature to hear the phrase, I don't know, when I ask you about how it may work. It's very important to say, yes, it looks like that's how it's happening, but we really don't know. Do you think we need new physics to complete the puzzle or not?
Well, let's say we need what I told you, the quantum physics, the analogy with quantum physics to understand more about our consciousness, but also more about the mind-brain relationship. What we know from quantum physics, and I know it's not widely accepted by quantum physicists, is that consciousness plays a pivot role in experiments. When you have the double slit experiment, then you can prove that light behaves as particles, and you can prove that light behaves as waves. Both is true, but it doesn't fit together because the consciousness of the experimenter from the scientist defines the result of the experiment. So the consciousness plays a pivotal role in this experiment. So for me, and that's all what you call when there's fields of probability, the objective reduction is called, that from all the possibilities, whether are there electrons or are there photons or just virtual particles, which are waves. And then it becomes a particle material aspect because of our consciousness. So that's all people are be studying it. I think consciousness, you cannot come beyond consciousness. Everything defines consciousness, also in science. And then also the question is objective science possible? My answer is no. It's always subjective. It's always depending of the consciousness of the researcher.
Yes, yes. Science is a little miracle where intersubjective consensus produces facts and that we call objective. Yes.
Yeah.
I'll be talking to you for much longer. I have two questions and they're not, I'll drop them casually, but are not that easy or that short to respond to. One is, are you afraid of dying?
No, let's say I'm not looking forward for my process of dying, but and I'm curious about death. I'm not afraid of death, but I'm curious about death. I'm not looking forward for the process of dying. That can be hard.
Yeah. Yeah, very eloquent answer. Thank you. The other one is, what are you working on now? And of course, you're giving lectures. I mean, is your job now to convey the message, or is there a particular area of research that you would want people to concentrate or that you're working on? What do you spend your time now?
I'm spending time of responding to emails and giving interviews and traveling around a little bit more now after COVID. But I've given many interviews and been part of documentaries about NDE and about consciousness. I've given, I think, since '88, I've been giving more than 500 lectures around the world. And so the problem is not we don't need new research about NDE, but the problem is that a lot of scientists and general population don't know anything, still don't know anything about NDE. And it has such an impact on our society about the future of the world. If you realize that everything is connected and the way we treat the planet Earth will be bad for our children and grandchildren. So we have to change the way we live, we have to change our own consciousness to change a little bit the world, but we cannot change someone else. So I try to share my insight to others in the hope they will change the consciousness. I will never try to convince people, but they have, and usually they're open when somebody died in their close family members or a partner or a child, and then they start thinking about death and about dying, about the importance of life as well. It's near-death experience is also a life insight experience. It's not just a death experience.
What a delightful human being you are, Pim.
Thank
you very much. What a delightful human being you are. Thank you very much. I'll leave it here because I see hands everywhere. They all want to ask you questions. So it's sharp on time. I'll hand it over back to James and and we'll hear from our members and audience.
I'll see. Yeah.
Thank you very much both for this really wonderful conversation. Thank you, really.
Who is now talking?
Oh, it's James.
Okay, I don't see it, but it must be somewhere.
I'll show my face just briefly. There. Hi.
Oh,
So
oh,
yes,
there you are. You're there, James. Yes. I didn't see you.
I'm good. I'm good. So yeah, so as we said, well, let's open up to Q&A. If I can, there's so many hands up. If we can please keep the questions quite direct and to the point we want to reach as many as we can. But we'll start off with Todd. Hey, Todd.
Well,
Yeah.
James, and
Yes,
it's
Tom.
not possible. Few sentences to thank you, Pim, for your work, the pioneering nature, and your having read it for a long time. But each one seems to tighten the web of us understanding, and it's such a delight to be able to share what you've done in other ones. And I point out just this very week in the New York Times, a popular culture thing with a large reach was an article on after deathbed visions. What can they tell us about?
Yeah, I've read the article as well. I think all these things here are important because it makes people think about it and recognize the end of life experience, because it happens so often with family members and also nurses and hospital people in working hospital, and especially doctors don't recognize the end of life experiences. So it's important to mention it. And I know in Holland, I've given many lectures in hospices. They're aware of it and they're asking and looking for it, and they react to people who are trying to talk about the end of life experiences.
To me, it's also something, we lament the fact that academia and the canon sort of keeps a gatekeeping on the subject matter, but it seems like those articles in your work and putting it out there in the popular world, the pressure can come from underneath, that it actually is such a democratic first-person experience that changes stuff from underneath. So thank you again, and I will pass it on to somebody else.
Thank you.
Amazing, Todd. Thank you so much. Next, let's go to Verena.
Yeah.
Thank you. I wonder if I make a comment from a more spiritual perspective. Is that acceptable?
Yes, of
Yeah,
course.
we can just keep it just brief, just because as I said, many questions. Thank you.
Well, it was, thank you, Pim, for the amazing work that you and your colleagues do to bring science to be proving some of the spiritual wisdom that is known. That's your role. Wonderful. And I was thinking about, you spoke twice at least about the difficulty of dying, and this must be hugely influenced by our place of dying as well as the environment we die in. I mean, even if our own beliefs support a death process, the environment around us will cloud it. And to make death a different experience. I'm thinking of the Alice Bailey attitudes to death, which, that it can be made a definite place in our life, that we consciously prepare for it as the bringer of changes.
You should do it. Everybody should do it.
Yeah.
And get rid of all the problems you have. Be open to your children and solve all the problems before you die. And then your process of dying will be more easy.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Taking the opportunity of the question that Verena asked, Pim, you think it's a good idea to die in hospitals? And of course, it depends what's going on, and probably you need to be there. But we have this tendency now of being born in hospitals and dying in hospitals. What a horrible place to arrive and to leave.
In Holland, a lot of babies are born at home. We have an organization, babies are born at home. And a lot of people are dying at home in Holland as well, or hospice. And sometimes when it's not possible, it's in the palliative care, but it's also like a hospice as well. But people prefer and should prefer to die at home. And it's possible in the Netherlands as well.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Verena, for coming in. Next, let's go to M. McIntyre. Hey.
It's still have to open the.
Oh, you're still muted.
You're muted. You're open. You have to open your.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah,
how's
that's it.
that?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
better.
So, Pim, thank you very much. This is very heartening, especially for someone as I have who've done a lot of work with dying people. It's great to hear this as a matter of social responsibility on your part. What I wanted to ask in terms of research is the relation, if I can put it that way, between people who are alive and relating with people who are deceased. And you mentioned that. If we look at that from a brain-mind point of view, could you consider doing research on people who have this awareness of the deceased as a relationship between minds in that sense, or presences, and as an approach to understanding what aspect of the mind brain is doing this, not only on the part of the deceased person, but also on the part of the living person who has that awareness?
Yeah. Well, when I talk about enhanced intuitive sensitivity of patients with a near-death experience, the threshold of consciousness is permanently changed, which means that they receive information from the non-local realm, and they're very easily contact people who are deceased. There's always openness, and when you don't have had, or we didn't have in the NDE, when you have contact with the consciousness of deceased relatives, usually happens during sleep because the threshold is lower. You're more easily. The deceased one decides if they will have contact.
Yeah.
You can ask for it, but they decide. And usually people say, I had a dream of someone who died, but it is not a dream because they never forget it. It has something very important information as well. And they know now for sure that consciousness is eternal, and that the connection, the love connection, it will be always there.
I'm thinking, you mentioned hundreds of thousands of people in Europe, hundreds of thousands of people in America.
120 million people at this.
Yes. Yes. What about studying them?
There have been studies done. Recently, a book has coming out about after-death communication. It is published in German. Nachtdoodcontacten, that was together with a group from the UK, and it will, or it has already been published. And there have been other studies as well published about after-death communication. Quite a few.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your work.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming in. Next, let's go to Veronica. Hi, Veronica.
Hi. Thank you so much. I have two questions that are related to each other. Have you been in contact with people who work in funeral homes? Because they seem to have at times very powerful experiences during, the work that they're doing. And consequently, what do you think of the speed at which we dispose of the dead? Sometimes a few hours after deaths, it goes to the morgue or such things, or cremated or whatever, when less than 100 years ago, you had a choice to wait for 2 or 3 days. What do you think of this, and does it have an impact on your work?
It doesn't have effect on my work, but I think it's so important to give the body rest for at least 3 days, because it's a process. It's a lot of energy leaving the body and information leaving the body for days. So leave them, sit there with a candle, talk to them. Everything is important. And I think 1 day is too short, because there's still a lot of energy and information that they get out of the body.
So that would have to do with, I guess, legislation in some countries or something.
Well, I don't know. I don't think in the Western Europe, the Christian people always wait for at least 3 days, but usually it's 4 or 5 days or 6 days. But Muslims bury them within 24 hours. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's the belief system.
Let me just add here, at least in Spain that I know, it's really hard to have a dead body at home. Really hard. Because the moment you call the ambulance, they'll take it. It's not legal, it's not illegal. It's in this gray line. Yeah.
In Holland, you can have your deceased relative at home as long as you want. Have a machine to keep it cold. And in my family, we always had done it before. So you keep the body at home with candles, with flowers, talking to them, etc.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, let's go to Ji-yoon. Hi.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you, James. And Àlex, thank you so much for your level of inquiry. You left so little on the table. But Dr. Pim, I'm very curious about energy you just mentioned in terms of patterns or patterning as it might relate to the earlier question on religious or spiritual, as it relates to DNA patterning, cell mitosis and meiosis, and the growth of forms, as that energy related to consciousness of a field of wholeness and inseparability as related to the non-locality and interconnected. Sorry, but that's just me showing up as usual. I hope that makes sense, but I can rephrase.
What I told, that for me, consciousness together with energy and information is fundamental in the universe. It's the source for everything in our universe, everything on Earth, everything in your body as well, is based on consciousness, energy, and information.
Thank you. I have a follow-up. Sorry, everyone. Is it possible that that information, the root word of which is form, has a shape or pattern? There's a friend of mine who had a near-death experience. Who saw a pattern, a series of patterns. It later became Dr. Hansiani cymatics, which is resonant frequency vibration, which is holomorphic, morphic fields, morphogenesis. So is there a meta, already existing information that can be effective in reformation of our consciousness, Gaia consciousness, feminine divine consciousness in particular, and then also be transformative, or so root word form as information, reformation, and transformation? And sorry, everyone, for my perpetually nested questioning.
I think that you have the morphogenetic consciousness also as an aspect of consciousness as well. But consciousness is much more. Let's say the loving energy is also consciousness. There are so a lot of different aspects of consciousness that comes together in our body as long as we are open for it. Also the healing capacity, the universal healing capacity is coming into your body. Let's say the people with an ND have the self-healing capacity and also can heal others by their hands because they're becoming an instrument of this universal healing energy as well. So everything is based on the energy and consciousness, non-local, coming into this physical world and in your body.
Deep and profound gratitude, everyone.
Thank you.
Next, I would like to invite Sigmar.
Hi, Pim. Good to see you again.
Hi, Sigmar.
Hi. So, two, three things. First, of course, I would like to stress your humanity and the openness. That is so important because we see so much of the younger researchers also try to make a mark with NDE, but it becomes then sometimes intellectual and quantum physics, but it's not from the heart and the openness of the mind. So thank you for that, to bring that quality in. The second is what you described. I wasn't aware that the divorce rate was that high. I knew about the depression. And being a psychotherapist, I see there's a lot of need then for people for that integration. And having a near-death experience, as you described, is 5 years old, and we talked about it when we met at the conference. I know the importance of that integration and how important that is, especially when we come from the place of love. How come we cannot include then the partner into that open state of love? So that would be something I would, of course, look at. And then the third thing that's my real question, and when we were sitting together with Raymond and discussing consciousness and NDEs, I did not have that topic in my mind, and maybe I see when I can visit you. Are you aware of a burst of rest light that some people have before death? And when you describe that everything, every activity stops, so to say, when science says the brain dies, how do you describe the afterglow? And what do you know about?
Yeah, the moment of death, the room where people are dying can be full of light, or sometimes they feel a ball of light leaving, especially usually the head, sometimes over the heart region. And the people who see this, I call it perceive it. You don't see it with the eyes, because when there are 10 people, perhaps 3 or 4 will perceive this ball of light leaving the body, because it's what we call the mind side. It's not the physical eyes who see this kind of light.
Exactly.
So
yeah,
it's
right.
the essence of who you are, leaving the body.
Mm-hmm.
And when I told this in a lecture sometimes, many years ago, there was a lady who said, I've seen a ball of light disappearing in my bed. And 9 months later, she gave birth to a child. And 4th time she became pregnant. And 1.5 hours after sexual intercourse, she saw a ball of light disappearing in her body. So the essence of this new human being, she saw as a ball of light, or perceived, I should say.
Yeah. And very briefly to Àlex. Àlex, in my work, I guide people into their moment of making the decision-making process for conception. And maybe we can talk more about it among each other. So if that is of interest, right?
Yes.
So for sure, there is a decision-making process. And when people come back to that, they have clear memory of their time as an embryo or time in birth and so on. So this, I've documented that. So, but thank you so much, you both, and especially thank you so much, Pim. So and good to see you again here. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For your contribution. Next, let's invite Alejandro. Hi.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Pim. Thank you very much, Àlex, for this wonderful talk. Just 2 very quick questions. First, have you ever seen or know of any NDE case after a brain death diagnostic, not only clinical death, but a brain death? And for example, I'm remembering now, I know the Self Does Not Die book, and I remember the case of George Rodonaya, which I think is the longest case I know of, which was an entire weekend between the clinical death and the recovery. And the second one, would you say that the NDE eaters?
Just answer the first question.
Yeah. So, okay. Thanks.
When the diagnosis of brain death is right, they will not survive. But there are some cases published where doctors said to the family his brain death, and can we get his organs? And then there were problems, and then at last he regained consciousness. And they said, I've seen everything, I've watched everything from a position out of the body. So they were in coma, but not brain death.
Although there's this case of it's horrible to say, but the decapitated pig study, you know, when they brought the heads of decapitated pigs and they were able to restore brain function. I mean, what they're doing today, it's both appalling and incredible. That there's this gray zone where, well, they're playing Dr. Frankenstein, but this calls
No.
to
I
questions
don't
about
know-
what it means to be dead, even
I don't
brain
know
dead.
these studies. I don't know these studies.
Yes, they stopped the study in some hours. That was 4 hours after the pig's dead, and they stopped it because they
Oh,
began to see some activity in the neurons with a special fluid solution. So yeah.
But you can tell that even when patients have become death, then still half of the neurons are alive, but the function of the brain as a whole is damaged. I mean, you can, after 10 days after death, you can still find some living neurons in the brain, so you can make tissue from it. But that doesn't mean that the brain is alive, but there are some cells isolated alive, which is totally different from a functioning brain or functioning instrument or functioning organ.
Yeah, I agree. And the second one, would you say that the NDEers have significant better recovering than the mean of people? Not only the recover of the critical situation, the cardiac arrest, but if the origin of the death is a long disease, because I think they have. I have seen a bit of cases here in Spain, and I think the doctors normally say it's amazing how you are recovering from your previous disease. Thank you.
You're totally right. It's what I call the self-healing capacity, and it is enhanced by the near-death experience. And Anita Morjani is one of the most famous cases, but there are many more. And I know a patient who had been in coma for 4 months, and usually you need 3 or 4 years to recover. And this patient was in 2 weeks, he was at home. He had an NDE. So I think the self-healing capacity can be very impressive.
Yeah, actually, in the Cell Does Not Die, in the second edition, you have an entire chapter dedicated to those cases, 11 cases. Yeah,
I know. It's a wonderful book.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Alejandro. Next, let's invite Paul. Hi, Paul.
Oh, hello. Hello. Thanks, James. Thank you very much, Pim. It's been wonderful. I'm not actually sure whether this one might be for Àlex or for you, but looking at some of the work of David Deutsch, I think it is. He's a physicist who focuses very much on the multiverse and the science behind the multiverse. It seems to be a theory that sort of prop up materialism, and your sort of understanding of things seems very much more an idealist philosophy, where consciousness is primary. I'm just wondering whether you have any comment, either of you, in regards to how we can understand that, because if there are other dimensions which we can only connect to once our filter mechanism, our brain, our interface is resolved or dissolved or dissipates, then is it that we're contacting other dimensions? Is it possible that, you know, there are parallel universes in your philosophy that exist for us to connect to ourselves, possibly in other dimensions? I'm just floating this as an idea. I'd love your comment.
I don't know anything about multiverse. I don't believe in it, but it could be possible. I'm not an expert on this. The only thing I can say is that non-local consciousness is always everywhere. It's always connected, and that's the basis where everything comes from. It's fundamental. So I don't need another theory like multiverse, multiple dimensions to understand how consciousness, non-locality of consciousness is really happening in the universe.
I would just add here, Paul, and also mentioning a sentence I recall from Pim's book. I think, Pim, somewhere you're right that some scientists will go large pains to continue answering ill-posed questions as opposed to reformulating them. So in my non-expert view of multiverses, this is another example where you have all these constants, of the universe that if you would change them a little bit, our universe couldn't exist. So rather than revising the question, I think the multiverse says, well, okay, so it means there must be infinite number of multiverses everywhere, but we could just cannot make contact with them, and that would explain the situation. In the same way that we may ask, how does the brain produce consciousness? And 99.9% of my neuroscience colleagues will just devote their careers to answering that, as opposed to reframing the question. So, well, it's a choice.
Yeah, interesting, Àlex, because, and I won't take it off the track, but David Deutsch refers to the branching nature of this quantum collapse. It's not a collapse, it's a branch, and the branch can go into other universes, and the universes interact. And I think it's a very complicated way of saying what Pim's saying, which is that, well, you know, non-locality is enough to cover all of that. So we don't need this branching, indefinite, sort of exponential growth of universes with multiplicities of copies of us in them, just to make sense of this non-locality concept. But thanks very much. I appreciate both your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So we are now about 2 minutes to the ending, so maybe we should start wrapping up. Apologies to those who couldn't ask their question, but I'm sure we can continue the discussion privately. Just to want to give you two the sort of the last word. Would you like to say anything just to close this session, Àlex and Pim?
But I would say that this conversation could belong to the Future Scientist series we started 2 years ago, because it seems to me that there are many hints as to what that future scientist may look like. Also the future human that we had previous year, and the future mind. So here Pim gave us 3 for the price of 1. So I'm triple grateful for this conversation.
I would like to thank all the people who were watching this interview and had the questions as well. So thank you very much, Àlex, for your questions.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, both. This has really been a wonderful session. And of course, thank you everyone who came here to listen in and asking your question and contributing in the chat. The chat has got so many interesting stories and contributions. So I do invite you all to have a read through that. Just before we go, I'd just like to invite you to the next 2 events that we will be having online. The first one will be on April the 9th, where we have our Book a Month Club, where we will have David Schramm and Caroline Pollack talking about Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse on a session entitled The Passion of the Western Mind. And the day after, on April 10th, we will have another session of The Future Mind, where Àlex will be in conversation with Lucia Meloni. So I hope to see you all then. In the meantime, please contact us on email, website, and yeah, have a wonderful time. Thank you so much, both.